2019 LSU or 2018 Clemson, who was more dominant? Statistically speaking, other than like 2001 Miami, these are bar for bar the two best teams to ever play the game. But who can claim to be the best? Who would beat the other if they both played? Now, you might be immediately thinking, well, 2019 LSU beat 2019 Clemson. Can't be that different. LSU has to be the clear answer. But no, right? The biggest difference in 2018 Clemson is the fact that Clemson had the greatest defensive line of all time. They had 3 guys drafted in the first round in the top 17 picks. Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, Clelin Ferrell, Austin Bryant, like a bunch of guys, a bunch of dogs. It was honestly a historic defensive line. So no matter who 2018 Clemson played, they could rush for every single play and get consistent pressure. In 2019, they didn't have any of those guys. They had guys that were on the team still last year, right? So they had to use a bunch of modified schemes. They had to blitz corners and blitz linebackers, and it just doesn't work. That did not work against Joe Burrow and the pass-heavy offense that they had. The only way to beat 2019 LSU would be to drop 7 in coverage, or maybe 6 and have a spy. But if you think 2019 LSU was the clear-cut answer, I don't think you're crazy, because LSU wins the aura battle by a landslide. Pardon my whiteness, but the swag was off the charts. The Burrow cigar pick, Ed Orgeron's voice and his vibe just all together, the personalities were just crazy. It was hard not to be enthralled, right? So it makes sense that without looking at the data, our eyes and our memories tell us that 2019 LSU was better because it was more of a fun watch. But what Clemson did just wasn't talked about as much. They didn't have the same aura. But with that being said, let's look into the data. 2018 Clemson scored 664 points. They allowed 197. So they outscored their opponents by 467 points in 15 games. That's more than any team in the college football playoff era. It might be more than any team ever. That just would have been way too hard for me to look up. And in a 4-game stretch from October 6th to November 3rd, Clemson beat Wake Forest 63-3, NC State 41-7, Florida State 59-10, and Louisville 77-16. The ACC may have been way weaker than the SEC, and I mean way weaker, but to outscore your conference rivals by 50 points a game, that's insane. Clemson's most impressive win, however, has to be the 44-16 romping of Alabama in the national championship game, an Alabama team that before that game, many people, Paul Feinbaum, anyone you talk about, they were claiming that Alabama team was the greatest college football team ever. They finished with the 3rd best offense and 12th best defense, and that's after getting smoked, right? I don't know what it was before, but it had to have been probably top 5 in each category. 2019 LSU, on the other hand, scored 726 points, which honestly is so absurd, has to be the most of all time. Literally 48.4 points per game. That's crazy. But they allowed 328 points per game, which honestly is pretty pedestrian. But it means that they outscored their opponents by 398 points in 15 games, which is still absurd, and I think the 3rd highest differential in the college football playoff era. But it's worse than Clemson, and I believe it's worse than 2021 Georgia as well. LSU had a bunch of impressive wins. The most impressive, in my opinion, has to be the Oklahoma game in the semifinal because of the vibe and the eye test, right? Like, everyone was watching that game, and that's when everyone decided, okay, this is the greatest team of all time. They are scoring at will. They are unstoppable. And to be fair, they absolutely were. But Oklahoma's defense was like 70th in the nation. Still unbelievable what they were doing. I mean, it was just unfathomable. It genuinely looked like an NFL team beating up on poor college kids. It just didn't seem like a fair fight. And this was in the college football playoff semifinal. These teams are supposed to be pretty evenly matched. 2018 Clemson had 5 first-team All-Americans, 7 guys drafted in the first round, and 21 guys drafted overall. LSU had 4 first-team All-Americans in 2019, 7 first-round picks, 30 total players drafted overall. So LSU gets the clear edge in total players drafted. Clemson had more All-Americans, and if we're going to tie-break the first-rounders, I would give it to Clemson because T. Higgins was drafted with the first pick in the second round. So I would give the nod to Clemson in that sense, especially because when you look at the total players drafted, it's not like all of them were making an impact in that given season. So Like 30 is a little too high. You know what I mean? It's not like all 30 were playing in that season and making an impact. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. And it may seem like my answer is Clemson, but I still do think that LSU has a really good argument because of that SEC schedule. Like the main argument to me isn't the fact that they beat 2019 Clemson, because again, that Clemson team was very different, and the team the year before was built to beat 2019 LSU. They did not have the same team in 2019. It's a different story, okay? But the SEC schedule, there is truth to that. Even if you hate the SEC, there's truth to that. LSU had the sixth hardest schedule that year, but I think they played like 10 teams that were ranked in the top 10 or something. It was something outrageous. And I honestly don't know how it wasn't the hardest schedule. I really don't. I don't know how they calculate that. But in 2018, Clemson had the 19th hardest schedule, which is a pretty steep drop. The usual ACC competitors like Miami, Louisville, Florida State, they were all pretty bad in 2018, especially Louisville. Syracuse was pretty good. NC State was okay. But like the three teams I mentioned, the three that should be good, they had a combined record of 14 and 23. That's abysmal. It was ugly. LSU had to play Alabama on the road. They had to play Auburn. They had to play A&M. I don't know. It was a tough schedule, right? I think they started the year with Texas. That was a close game, kind of. I think it's safe to say that LSU's schedule was much harder, okay? Like, it just isn't a discussion. But for how weak the ACC was, LSU still let Vanderbilt score 38 points against their defense. They still let a terrible 4-8 Ole Miss team score 37 points against their defense. The bottom barrel teams in the ACC that year, like the Florida State in the ACC, who didn't make a bowl game, I don't think, they're beating Vanderbilt, I think, handedly, right? But Clemson beat that Florida State team 59-10, right? So that's the difference, in my opinion, where you can compare the schedules all you want, but LSU still had some cakewalk teams that they played, and they didn't necessarily dominate the way that Clemson dominated. I don't think it's Clemson's fault that the teams that are supposed to be their hardest competition in the ACC just weren't good. And so what? They took care of business. What were they supposed to do, right? And I say Clemson beat Florida State 59-10. It really was 59-3. Florida State didn't score until Clemson's walk-on fourth stringers were playing with like 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It was 59-3. And I really think if LSU wants to claim that they're the greatest, I feel like maybe you beat the Vanderbilts with a score like that. You don't let Vanderbilt score almost 40 points. I mean, it was 44-30 in the fourth quarter against Ole Miss for LSU. Like, that game is pretty much over, but it's not like you blew them out. Okay, right? And that's an Ole Miss team that barely beat Southeast Louisiana at home. LSU just had the luxury of scoring so easily on offense that they didn't really have to worry about the defensive side of the ball at all. And I think that helped them, honestly, in their being the greatest team of all time argument, because the casual public got to see the stars still in the game late in the fourth quarter, you know? People were still tuned into their games because they wanted to see the fireworks, but I remember leaving Clemson games at halftime because they were up 49-0, and the third stringers were already in the game. Nobody wanted to see dominance to that extent. It's incomprehensible. Like, the human mind just chose to ignore its significance because it offered no intrigue. Like, imagine you're in a bar and both teams are playing cakewalk opponents at the same time. It's the third quarter. Clemson is up 63-3 against Louisville. All the white guy walk-ons are on. They're in the game. The stands are empty. But the TV behind you is LSU up 34-23 in the third quarter against Ole Miss. Burrow and company have the ball. They're driving. Vaught Hemingway Stadium is packed and rowdy. Justin Jefferson just made a crazy play, etc., etc. Point is, your eyeballs, without a doubt, are going to bolt to that TV, and you're going to see unbelievable, godlike work from the LSU super team because they had a super team. And you're going to think, wow, this is the greatest team ever. But it's only because you didn't really watch 2018 Clemson. Like, really think about it. How many games did you watch of 2018 Clemson? I don't know. You could say I'm reaching, but after this long deep dive, I feel pretty confident in naming 2018 Clemson Tigers the greatest college football team of the 21st century, but I doubt I convinced any of you.